Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to the Sunday Wire. Again, I'm your host, Patrick Henningsen. We're streaming out live on the Alternate Current Radio Network and also at 21stCenturyWire.com. We're also broadcasting live on X, on Rumble, on Facebook, on our fan page on Facebook, also on BitChute, still doing beta test live streams on BitChute. Looks like it's going well on that platform. We'll be hopefully expanding a little bit there. And also on Odyssey. It's another great video sharing platform. This is the Overdrive segment. What a tremendous interview just before the break with Mohammed Marandi from Tehran. I mean, unbelievable situation, what's happened in the Middle East. I mean, I'm still trying to process it myself. And it's just world changing. We're living through major pivot point in history, ladies and gentlemen. So I encourage you to share this episode with your friends. Share the Marandi interview. We'll also cut that in as an individual interview for our YouTube channel later in the week as well. And appreciate all you guys who are sharing our channels and spreading the word about this show and also about 21stCenturyWire.com. Now, there's a number of other major stories. I mean, there's stuff happening in the media right now that I want to talk about. And I want to bring on our next guest, who is a fantastic media analyst, among other things. He's doing some great journalism, some great reporting. And I think he's somebody I want to speak to about some of these issues because he knows what it's like on the inside of the production as well as on the outside in the audience as well. So I want to welcome onto the stage right now, James Lee, joining us on this segment of Overdrive. James, it's great to have you with us.
Hey, Patrick, thanks for having me on.
It's great to have you, James. Now, there's some big stories I want to get into, and I want to also point people to James's Twitter feed right now. Just go to @5149 James Lee. Follow James. You definitely will not be disappointed. He's putting out content by the hour and some days, but all the top stories, all the main stories, James is hitting them. James, I want to say your Twitter feed is epic, and keep up the great work. Also, James, get this out of the way. You're on TikTok. You've got a presence on other platforms. Go ahead and give a shout out.
Yeah, I'm on basically all the major platforms. A little bit different, tailored to each platform. Obviously, on Twitter, that's where if I have some thought, I'm just going to throw it out there. But I'm also on TikTok, as well as Instagram when it comes to short form content. And then on YouTube, that's where I produce a little bit of my longer form documentaries that I get into a couple times a month, where I dive in real deep into a specific topic. So definitely check that out. Whatever fits your taste, I think you'll find something interesting there for you. And it's all the same handle, 5149 James Lee.
Thanks, James. And just before we get into some of the stories, I mean, one of the big stories that broke is one of the probably one of the biggest stars in independent media, as it were, Candace Owens. Her coverage of the USS Liberty incident just blown up on every platform. Before we get to that, though, I want to get your take right now from a U.S. perspective. How do you see this Biden-Trump transition unfolding right now? I want to get your thoughts on this just in general.
Well, the Biden-Trump transition, I mean, I think it will go smoothly. I think there's a lot of like under kind of conspiracies out there saying that Biden is actually happy that this is happening. He didn't want Kamala to take over, but I won't get too much into that. But I think the transition will be fairly smooth. I think what's interesting here in terms of the transition is who Trump has coming in terms of his cabinet picks, right? I see a few overarching themes there when it comes to his cabinet picks. So first of all, the $100 million from Miriam Adelson did wonders, right? You see across the board, almost every single person, if not every single person that he has chosen to be in his inner circle, is a hardcore Zionist, very much pro-Israel, right? You got guys like Marco Rubio, Hegseth, Mike Waltz, Stefanik, ambassador to the UN, on and on and on. So I think that's one theme to look out for, is what he's going to do in terms of foreign policy in the Middle East. And then, you got a lot of billionaires coming in his cabinet as well, which is interesting. I don't necessarily think that's a good or a bad thing, but it's an interesting sort of, I guess, observation, right? Because on one hand, you could say that, hey, they're just in it for themselves. But on the other hand, it's like, hey, these are guys who already have money. So I'm not sure how much more they could gain out of this in terms of their own financial benefit. So maybe they are going to do something good for this country. Maybe they are going to turn course and and do some things differently than in the past. Because I think it could be argued that the steady or the status quo isn't exactly working out that well. So that's another thing to kind of just have in the background, just to percolate on. And also, loyalty to Trump. You could see everybody in his cabinet is very, very loyal to him. I think he wants to avoid what happened last time with people undermining him and such, which I think is understandable. I think the more liberal media paints this as like a bad thing, but I'm not sure if anybody would want to appoint people to work with who are sort of not loyal to them. So I think it's more about whether these people are qualified for the job. And I do see a couple of interesting picks. Like, for example, RFK Jr. has made a lot of noise here in the U.S. as far as his pick for HHS secretary, just because he has a lot of ideas that would necessarily mean a change in the way things work in health and pharmaceuticals and such. He's talked about big moves, even as radical as banning advertising from pharmaceutical companies on the airwaves, which would mean that they kind of lose out on that influence, I would say, because nobody really buys pharmaceutical products based on advertising on TV. That's the move where they're trying to buy loyalty from these networks to say, hey, we're supporting you with millions, billions of dollars in some cases, and so you better listen to us, and maybe don't cover this story or cover the story in this way or that way. So I think he's an interesting pick. And another one is that I saw was Lori Chavez, who is his appointment to be the labor secretary. And I saw it funny. I have this in front of me because I wanted to call this out. A very interesting quote in Politico where they said employers are worried about Trump's unconventional pick to lead the Labor Department, and that she is pro-labor. and I thought, well, isn't the labor secretary supposed to represent labor? I thought that was just an interesting call out from a magazine like Politico. It's like, are we hiding? Are we just kind of getting past the sort of hiding around what labor is supposed to be? We're just saying, hey, no, labor is supposed to be a pro-commerce, pick. So those are just some of the big themes that I see kind of across the board. I think another interesting one, I think that made a lot of noise, or not a lot of noise, but Lena Khan, I think, is one of the more popular members in the Biden administration. And he's got a new guy coming in, Andrew Ferguson, who I think will kind of depart from being as aggressive on monopoly power, but he's also really outspoken against big tech. So you'll see those policies continue. So it's kind of as with Trump, it's kind of a mixed bag. And it's going to be different, which will be interesting to kind of see how it plays out. But yeah, sorry, that was a little bit of a overview that I saw in terms of some of the changes that we can expect coming up.
Yeah, that labor secretary pick is interesting, but that's Trump, signaling to his base, his new base, Rust Belt, working class. So it's the Republicans embracing a whole new class of Americans formally. That's interesting. But what do you think about the accusations that Biden is trying to sabotage an incoming Trump administration by encouraging Zelensky to fire missiles into territory? I mean, and the Middle East thing we'll get to in a moment, but just on that Ukraine issue, what do you think about those accusations?
Yeah, so that's the part where I would more so remove Biden from that whole thing, just because I'm not really even convinced that Biden even knows what's going on right now with, either domestically or internationally, it could be argued. But I think that's more of, what you would call the military industrial complex apparatus, or you can call them the deep state, whatever these terms that people like to use. I think that's them kind of signaling to Trump that hey, we're still here. And I know that you have some ideas coming in, and Trump has been very vocal about being anti-war, right? Wanting these endless wars to come to an end, which would obviously impact the way money flows in DC and around that area. So I think that's them kind of signaling, hey, we're here, and if you go too far, we're going to lay the hammer down on you. I think that's sort of that deep state pushing back a little bit, sending a few signals there. And it is definitely alarming to see, because they're doing this as kind of, I think you could call it a power play, but we are risking, nuclear war potentially. I don't want to be hyperbolic, but that is on the table if you go too far in one of these moves, right? To signal strength. I think that's where I think a lot of the the regular people kind of are just at the whims of these folks who are all just jockeying in position for power and money and things like that, where it just leaves us to be like, wow, you know, we could be Armageddon any day, and they're just kind of having fun and games.
Not hyperbolic at all, James. No less hyperbolic than the arc of an ICBM missile. So there's huge threats, especially for Europe. Europe is very much on edge now, looking at this situation. So we hope for the best. Obviously, I mean, you mentioned the Miriam Adelson $100 million payoff. That's definitely reflected in the cabinet. Howard Lutnick, Jared Kushner, absolutely looking out for Netanyahu's interests. They seem to have done that. But the issue of Israel is it's a little bit tricky now, because there's been a few interesting dissenters from the right wing, one of which is Candace Owens. And she just reported a story this week that has just gone mental in terms of engagement on the USS Liberty. Tell us about this, because I know you've commented or tweeted on it. To me, this is incredible. I mean, I remember talking about this. Alex Jones actually did a great piece of film on this back in 2012. That's how I got kind of exposed to that story back in 2010 or 2011. I think it was Terror Storm, one of his documentaries when he used to make brilliant films. But he covered that, and then I kind of did more research on that. And it's not a story that gets any mainstream coverage, and certainly the mainstream media won't cover it. But Candace has the kind of footprint that mainstream media outlets have. Tell us about this.
Yeah, I think this is huge for a number of different reasons. And the Liberty is a story that I've been following for a little while now. And I even, so just for background context for your audience, so she brought on Phil Turney, who is a USS Liberty veteran, and he is also the president of the USS Liberty Veterans Association. And he's been speaking out about the Liberty, you can call it an incident, for the past 20, 30 years. Because these are guys that are war veterans, a lot of them Purple Heart, because they're injured in combat. And the U.S. Congress has basically shunned these people. I've heard a story when I talked to Phil this past summer, and I was hoping this story would get more traction from somebody. I know it's been sort of bubbling underneath the surface for a long time. I tried to bring him on to breaking points. We made a little bit of noise there, but for somebody like Candace to cover it, I think is huge, because you're talking about guys who have been, what Phil's told me allegedly is that they've been threatened by our own government. There have been people who have threatened him in person. He says maybe they're members of Mossad, maybe not. He doesn't know, but certainly the message had been sent to him multiple times. And they've really gotten no fair hearing or investigation done about this incident. And just for more context on that incident is back in 1967, there was a U.S. naval vessel that was positioned off of the Sinai Peninsula during the Six-Day War. And it was attacked in broad daylight by the Israeli military, both from the air and also submarine. And it was just a massive incident at the time. And very quickly, it turned into a cover-up from what we've seen in that, you know, there's allegations that Lyndon Johnson knew about this, as well as I think it was the Secretary of Defense, Robert McNamara, also knew about this as well. And they very much went with the Israeli investigation to say, oh, we're sorry. The official line of inquiry is that, hey, this is a mistake. We didn't know we mistaken you for an Egyptian vessel, but there's a lot of evidence that just is very, very peculiar. And I don't know how much you want to dive into, but I certainly can share a lot of the evidence here. But in terms of Candace Owens commenting on this and covering this story, I think is huge. Because she's probably one of the largest media personalities to cover this story in depth and actually bring on firsthand account of what happened on that day. Secondly, she's also a figure in the conservative right. So typically, these guys are very much aligned in the pro-Israel camp. And this kind of coverage is very much, it's just not there. They don't talk about this, and it's not really allowed to be talked about. You know, imagine, I know the follow from her and the Daily Wire was over this, you know, the Israel issue. And so that would never be allowed in terms of that particular outlet. So for her to cover this and for more people to be woken up by this is huge. I mean, I saw a poll. There's an account on Twitter. I don't know if you saw this, Patrick, but it's like a Trump poll thing. It's a huge account, just like tweeting out, polls for people to answer. And they said, hey, who is America's biggest enemy? And you had countries on there like Iran, China, Syria, I think, and then other. And I think the poll went 50% other. And then if you look through the comments, it all just says Israel down the board. And so I think, this is the part where the MAGA base, I think, is different than the MAGA base of the past. And you have more dissenters in saying, hey, I think the official, State Department narrative is not correct, right? Is our true largest threat China? Is it actually Russia and these countries? Or is it a country that's supposedly our ally who has somehow, allegedly potentially killed one of our presidents and threatened to assassinate 3 or 4 more just on record that we know of, and has, when we give billions of dollars to them every single year, is this actually a good relationship, or is there something else going on? I think people are starting to awaken to that. And I think her covering that is huge. Is a huge development in that sense.
Oh, it does. It really throws a spanner in the works on that conversation because, after all, Candace is very well respected, very well liked and trusted by millions of people. And she's quite daring and quite ballsy in the kind of stories that she's been taking on, stuff that nobody else would touch because it's just too hot, third rail sort of topics like Tucker does, but Candace takes it a little bit even further. So in that kind of mainstream independent or those big independent media outlets, she's probably the most fearless, I would say. And this shows it. She's done a great job here. I'm going to play this clip just to give a little bit of a taste of what she put out. But she did a nice voiceover, some images, so kind of like documentary format within her interview with Phil Turney, but extremely informative and absolutely incredible in terms of factual information. Let's look at this real quick and get your comment, James.
All right, you guys, I'll get right into this. A couple of weeks ago, I received a letter that changed my life, certainly changed the course of my life in politics. And I'm going to read you that letter now and let you know that the author of it is sitting across from me. It reads, "My name is Philip Turney. I am 77 years old today. On June 8th, 1967, I was just 20 years old when the gallant crew of the USS Liberty was savagely attacked. Our American flag was proudly flying on our ship in the Mediterranean Sea that day. The designation AGTR-5 was clearly painted on the bow, port, and starboard sides. USS Liberty was written in English on her stern. When we arrived on June 7th, we were overflown by Israeli reconnaissance aircraft, and the same activity was repeated on the morning of June 8th. We were positively identified as American and friendly by the IDF. We had requested a destroyer escort long before we entered the Mediterranean, but we were denied twice. Our captain assured us that we were clearly marked as American and we therefore had nothing to fear. We were alone, 12.5 miles off the coast of the Sinai Peninsula, always in international waters. The Israeli reconnaissance aircraft were clearly marked with the Star of David. We therefore felt secure, seeing a flying boxcar and other smaller recon propeller aircraft taking good care of us. The attack began at 2 o'clock on a beautiful, bright, sunny day by French-made Mirage and Mistral jets painted black with no markings. We had no clue who was attacking us, but assumed it was an Arab state. During the first pass-by, the jets took out all but one of our transmitting antennas, as well as every watertight door above the waterline. The air attack lasted about 25 minutes, killing and maiming our firefighters and any sailor who moved. Our radio man took one antenna offline, so it wasn't transmitting and wasn't hit. He ran a long wire to it, and the SOS went out to the 6th Fleet. It was even picked up as far away as Vietnam. Rockstar, Rockstar, under attack by an unknown jet aircraft. Help us, help us. Captain Tully, skipper of the USS Saratoga, sent jets to come to our aid. Before the jets hit the horizon, they were recalled by Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara.
So, James, that's just a little taste of it. But towards the end, you could see really implications of a cover-up, that there were U.S. officials at the White House level that wanted that attack to take place. That's certainly what the evidence says. It's what Phil Turney's testimony points to. So, your thoughts on that?
Absolutely. There is definitely a lot of evidence of a cover up. There was a book that was written many years ago, is by this BBC journalist, Peter Huhnam. I don't know if you're familiar with his works, but he spoke to the chief engineer of the Liberty. And in that book, they talked about how they were basically guinea pigs that were sent out there to make it look like Egypt was somehow involved with that attack and potentially bring about World War III. There's evidence of like bombers that were ready to go on that morning that were sent, that were basically sitting on the runway for hours waiting to be deployed for whatever might have happened. The part that's unclear in terms of the evidence is like why the ship wasn't ultimately sunk, how they were allowed to sort of hobble back to port in Malta. And that's where I think some of the transmissions had gone out to identify, hey, this is Israel doing it. And so at that point, the gig was kind of up, in that if they were to continue doing this, that obviously then that means that they would knowingly be doing this. Although there are already transcripts saying that proves that the Israeli fighter pilots knew that it was an American ship, because they doubled confirmed with the command center to say, hey, by the way, this is American. I see the flag. You still want me to, attack? And they said, yeah, go ahead, do it. That's what we've been told to do. And there was I don't know if you're going to play this clip later, but there was a huge kind of bombshell where Phil Turney talked about Isaac Kidd, who was the admiral in charge of the investigation. And they basically when what happened there was he's like, hey, tell me exactly what happened. He talked about him taking off his stars and say, hey, just tell me exactly what you saw. They told him everything. And afterwards, Isaac Kidd puts the stars back on and says, hey, by the way, if you ever speak of this incident again, you're going to receive fines, imprisonment, or worse. And I mean, we all know worse. There's an implication there of what might be, what might be in store for you if you speak out loudly. So basically, nobody talked about this for decades until a reporter brought this up and said, hey, this is like the whatever anniversary of the attack. And then more and more people said, oh, wait, this is kind of weird. Like, what happened? We just don't know about it. The captain was given a Congressional Medal of Honor in secret. That doesn't happen. Usually the Congressional Medal of Honor in the U.S. is given by the President of the United States, but this was done in secret. All the Purple Heart ceremonies were also privately held. So it's just a lot of stuff that would lend itself to a cover-up, and there has been no full congressional inquiry. It was the only one that, in terms of an attack on a U.S. ship, that hasn't received it. And I think it's about time. I think they're kind of, to me, it seems like the U.S. government is kind of waiting out the clock, right? You talked about Phil Turney, he's 77 years old, and there's only a few of these guys left that are out there trying to make noise about this, and I think they're trying to burn out the clock. So I think this is the time to sort of, if there is a member of Congress out there who is brave enough to kind of make noise and at least bring this up in a formal congressional hearing, that would be huge in terms of just opening the eyes to Americans of like, do we want to assess, to me, it's like, do we want to assess our relationship with Israel? Is it what they tell us it is, or is there something perhaps more sinister that the American public should know about?
And also just to do right by American servicemen.
Absolutely.
The ones who've died, the survivors as well. This is kind of a lingering thing that's been unresolved, and it must be a horrible feeling having served your country. It's the most decorated ship in the U.S. Navy. Most people don't know that. So it'd be great to set the record straight. I mean, the whole Israel policy thing is quite extraordinary considering everything we've seen the last 14 months. I mean, certainly it deserves to be reconsidered, relooked at, reevaluated, but whether that's going to happen under a Trump administration, who arguably is going to be the most pro-Israel administration coming down the line right now. Israel's already annexed the Golan Heights effectively in the last week or so. So I don't know. It's going to be tough, but here's Candace. We'll put this up on screen. She's tweeted. She's got her hat there, USS Liberty. So she's really happy. I think you could tell there's a sense of fulfillment on her part by doing the story. And although we've seen this story, years ago, and many people have covered it, but to see her with her platform to take this and then really do a proper job, I think, in her reporting on this. I'm very impressed with the care in the interview and how she handled it, how she had an attention to the details of the story. Very good journalism on her part. I think this is going to go a long way to hopefully raised awareness on this issue, and also, like you said, James, have people question, what exactly is this relationship? Is this a beneficial relationship with Israel, or is it symbiotic, or is it parasitic? Who's benefiting from this? Certainly, that's up for discussion, I would hope.
Absolutely, and I'm a little bit surprised that nobody of her kind of level on the left, in terms of the independent media, has even dove as deeply as she did into this story. So it leads me to wonder, exactly why people haven't talked about this more, right? Because I think it is an integral part of the story. And like the point you made about the armed forces, like, how could you feel comfortable serving in the armed forces if you know, or if you have this story lingering in the background to say, hey, by the way, if a foreign power requests this, we're actually going to prioritize their interests over the health and well-being and safety and honor of U.S. veterans.
Yeah. And also, just an interesting factoid, one of the reasons given as to why the ship wasn't sunk is because the Russians caught some of the communications, because they were in the area, Russian listening signals intelligence gathering in the Med, caught that was known at the time. And this is one of the reasons, I think, possibly why they backed off. So this is one of those unresolved issues where there might have been some horse trading behind the scenes between the United States and the Soviet Union, some leverage for some other issue. Who knows? This is what happens in the world of power politics. But that's a really important one. You can go to Candace Owens' channels. Also, check her feed on Twitter as well. She's got some of those clips and highlights as well. And there's another interesting, speaking of the Middle East and Syria, I don't know if you caught this story, James, of CNN's star award-winning reporter, their frontline, gritty, intrepid reporter, Clarissa Ward, was in Syria, and she turned up at this prison at an Air Force base, I think, in Syria. Let's go ahead, and I got a little clip here. I want to get your reaction to this.
After 3 months in a windowless cell, he can finally see the sky. My God, the light, he says. Oh God, there is light. My God, there is light. Okay.
Do I have to play any more of that?
Right. I apologize for this outward laughing response, but that's a comical. I mean, that clip maybe would have worked 20, 30 years ago. I don't know. Maybe the public would have bought it then. But, I have so many things to say about it. I mean, my initial reaction, obviously, that looked extremely staged for a number of reasons, right? I've read some of the reporting about it, that that prisoner had been locked in there for months without water for at least 3 or 4 days, they said. Certainly, he doesn't look to be in that condition. I mean, if you really were deprived of water and food for that long, you would probably, your face would be sort of
emaciated. Yeah, you'd be.
Yeah, and you would immediately give him water. You wouldn't pull up a chair there. It's like, oh, let's do a quick interview, and then we'll have you on your way.
You don't even know what bizarre. He's in for. I mean, he could be a murderer or a rapist, or you have no idea. So there's all sorts of things. And they claim they shot the lock off, but they wouldn't show the camera. And who shoots locks off? But in the Hollywood films these days, usually they use bolt cutters or something. So, I mean, the whole thing was just unbelievable. The acting was really just over the top, I thought. And I'm telling you this because it's not the first time Clarissa Ward has pushed out one of these. But James, I'll tell you, every time she pushes these out, she gets a journalism award afterwards. And this is the real tragedy of these CNN staged war propaganda pieces. They always get a reward at the end. So it's almost as if the establishment's saying, hey, thanks for what you do, and you're untouchable now as an award-winning journalist.
And that's really a shame, because they have so many resources at their disposal to really do a good job with the coverage, right? I, don't have the resources necessarily to do that type of work, which I would love to do, right? To gather evidence on the ground, to really report to the world what's going on in these war-torn regions, or whether it be other issues that they go and cover. But they choose to manufacture stories, which is a shame, because they really could be telling us exactly what's going on, how the people are suffering, and get the real stories out. But instead, they choose to do propaganda pieces with those resources, which is completely, I don't know. I think it really does undermine, I think, the journalistic integrity for everybody, not just CNN, but everybody across the board who does, puts their lives on the line to do this type of work and who want to do a good job. I think this sort of undercuts everything and leads to a situation, they're always talking about, misinformation, disinformation, and they're probably one of the biggest, spreaders of misinformation and disinformation. Except I think for me, it's just that in the past, they're the only ones who could do misinformation. Now almost everybody can do you have a Twitter account, you go on there, you say whatever you want, and they don't really like that. They want to be able to control the narrative, and I think that's frustrating for them right now. And I don't exactly know what's going to come out of this. Maybe they'll, the market will dictate that they reform their coverage. Maybe not. There's a lot of financial incentives that go the other way, right? If you look at how they make money, it's not really from the consumers. It's really from big corporation. That's why I think mainstream media is really no longer the right moniker. I think it's more corporate media. I think the mainstream is now all of these people who have built their platforms independently and have a much larger audience, to be quite honest, than those guys. So we'll see. I mean, I think the next 2 to 5 years will be a really interesting time in terms of news and journalism, because you have the rise of the independent media, but the empire is just not going to go quietly into the night. So at least for me, I'm starting to notice in the background people being picked off one by one, right? Because they'll say, hey, you are allowed, you can keep your name, you can keep your show, whatever you want to do. We're going to sort of fund you from behind the scenes, and there's just going to be a couple, you can do whatever coverage you want. There's a couple of issues that either you can't touch or you have to cover in this way. And I think we'll start to see this happen as with, in independent media, to have a co-opting from the corporate side. And we'll see how successful they are at this. But I think it's going to be an interesting battle in the coming years.
Yeah, there's two on the CNN front. I mean, they're just they've got a couple of objectives that I can bring her tweet up here. I mean, this is what they said: Syria is free. It's like this is really kind of proselytizing for the kind of Democracy Roadshow. Again, an extraordinary moment. She said this was the most gripping moment of her whole career. But I love at the bottom you see the community notes savaged. Yeah. CNN, and she herself got savaged. She blocked me from tagging her now after this, because I pointed out that she said on her profile, on her career profile, she's fluent in Arabic, yet she was speaking to this guy in English the whole time, which I thought was very strange. So obviously she's playing to the camera there. She didn't like that at all, that I pointed that out. And that I made a comment under her tweet, got almost 100,000 views on a comment. Wow. So that was just one of many that got a lot of engagement. So she's probably horrified, as are her friends who are defending her in the industry. But, quite frankly, James, she deserves every bit of abuse that she's going to get on this, because some of the stuff that she's done, like in Gaza, diving into a roadside ditch, claiming they were under a missile attack by Hamas. I mean, just ridiculous stuff. But there's another clip that there's two things. They want to stick the knife into the Assad legacy. So it's all about prisons. And if it was so bad, why do they need to make up a story to kind of reiterate or amplify or push this narrative that Assad was the brutal dictator running pogroms? Because you wouldn't need to make up fake stories if that was well known and everyone's convinced. Clearly not everybody's convinced. That's why they've done it. But there's another angle to this, which she is also tasked with, it seems. This is a clip from the United Nations from 2017. And this is Clarissa Ward testifying as a, quote, journalist at the UN. And listen to who she is basically running cover for. This was right after the heat of the dirty war on Syria at that time. Here she is.
The only ones who have emerged as heroes on the ground, alongside brave doctors like Dr. Attar and Dr. Sahlul, alongside the White Helmets, are the Islamist factions, even to those who hate fundamentalism, even to those who see that the rebels themselves are carrying out atrocities. And not because the people there are all terrorists, but because the Islamists are the ones who have stepped in to fill the void. And that should not come as a surprise to anyone in this room, because all of us could see it happening as far back as 2012.
So she's kind of legitimizing Al-Qaeda, Al-Nusra, HTS, ISIS, because they're all synonymous. And even counterterrorism people are starting to admit that now on U.S. mainstream. There she was back in 2017, really doing public relations almost for the Islamists, as she calls it. And these are designated terrorist groups in the United States. So that's quite extraordinary that she would be dispatched to push that talking point at a UN meeting or ARIA format meeting or something like that. I mean, that's incredible. So she's not just any reporter. She has kind of a very specific remit, I think, James. Go ahead.
Absolutely. I mean, if you notice, the Twitter account that you flashed up there a couple minutes ago was CNN PR. I don't even know why CNN would have a PR division. Isn't it just news? Why is there a PR?
I'm not sure. CNN International PR. Who knows? It could even be. I'll see if it's a spoof account. I'm not sure, but it looks like it's somewhat serious. But yeah, that is kind of interesting. Yeah. Well spotted. I need to look into that.
Yeah. So I mean, I think that's just to say that when you go do this reporting, where what they do is they have a specific story that they're looking for, and if they can't find it, they'll just manufacture it. Right. I mean, if you look at, the thing where you talked about Israel, right? When she like dove onto the ground and even though there was really nothing going on, or I think in Ukraine, there was another situation of like people being shelled. I don't know if it was her or somebody else. And then you just see like some old lady walking by with her groceries or something. And it's just like a bizarre situation where there's actual stories to be reported here. Just do the reporting. And in Israel too, I mean, if you look at October 7th, right, plenty of real stories to go with, but then they choose to manufacture, the babies in the ovens or the mass rapes and all these things that end up not being true. And then you completely undermine your whole reporting. I think we're at the end of this kind of thing being effective. I think it was effective for a very, very long time. I don't think it no longer is. And you can see it with Trump's base, right? I don't know how much the base will have how much power they'll have to impact the actual policies, but you could see that the people aren't buying the stories anymore, right? Just for that poll that I brought up, 10 minutes ago when I was just speaking to you, is that the people know more so, okay, Russia has always thought Iran, China, these three countries have been sort of the axis of evil, but now those people, people are not saying, like, are they really the axis of evil, or is it another country that's actively right now killing tens of thousands of children and women actively? I don't know if obviously Russia is engaged in a war, so you could say, okay, you could throw them in. They're not necessarily the bastions of democracy and the light, but certainly there's some sort of obfuscation of like why that war even exists, right? I don't know how many people, other than I've seen on mainstream Jeffrey Sachs talk about this, but I don't know how many people have actually been able to be given the platform to explain the 10, 15-year context of how, that war came about. No,
that's verboten. Absolutely forbidden in mainstream. I've been absolutely harangued for my views on that. All I'm doing is, like you said, James, just kind of moving the clock back a little bit to give some historical context, but they always truncate the events before. So that history begins in Ukraine on February 26th. History begins on October 7th, 2023. Nothing happened before that. The Palestinians and the Israelis were skipping through the olive fields, having picnics together. And all of a sudden, Hamas, had this wild outbreak of violence, and it shocked the world as if nothing happened the previous 80 years. But I mean, that's kind of what we're dealing with right now in the media environment. That's an interesting conversation on its own. There's a generational conversation when people that are not red pilled on some issues, but suddenly these things come out and blow away sort of large sections of the population to the point where they're inundated with propaganda right off from the onset. I'm very, very encouraged by the Gen Zers and how they have taken the Palestinian issue and really understood it well, and have gone out and protested in a way that we couldn't pay people to protest against the Iraq war, the dirty war in Syria. So I think it's really positive. So whatever's happening on that front, could be TikTok, could be who knows, but they are getting the facts. They are getting an understanding from that. I don't know if you've seen that. I think TikTok's had a huge impact on
and that's one of the reasons I think that TikTok is going to go away. I think there's the likelihood of it going away in the United States is fairly high at this point, just because Trump, even though he's vocally, or he's publicly said that he doesn't want it to be banned, he actually doesn't have any power in the sense here, because it did go through Congress and there would just need to be congressional action to undo it. The only thing he could probably do is maybe use the bully pulpit a little bit to say, hey, we want this looked at. Let's reevaluate the situation. Or to say the courts, hey, it's the Supreme Court. You guys should take this issue up as a First Amendment issue, because right now that's where it sits. It's in, for a little bit of background. So in April, officially Joe Biden signed into law the TikTok ban. They kind of snuck that into the legislation that would also give Ukraine and Israel billions of, tens of billions of dollars. They snuck it into that bill. And so now on January 19th is one day before Inauguration Day, that ban will set to take effect. I saw an article just a couple days ago where the White House is warning and telling Google and Apple that they should get ready to remove TikTok from the App Store. Just, keep that in mind. So I think there's a strong likelihood that it will go through. We'll see what happens in the next couple of weeks. I think it's critical times for the app. But yeah, I do think because TikTok is, an app that a lot of people use that don't pay attention to any politics. And sometimes, in the algorithm, you'll have these stories seep through. People watch whatever cooking shows, dancing videos. Those are big on there. But then you'll see something slip through and be like, whoa, what was that? And I don't think they like that. Whereas I think a platform like X, you see all this stuff all the time, but I don't think X is ubiquitous in its use by what I would call maybe more normie people who are just out there for more entertainment style content. They're not there. And the problem with these platforms, like YouTube is a huge platform, entertainment style. There's people doing this reporting on there as well. But YouTube does a really good job of kind of suppressing content. I've put out videos, let's say on the USS Liberty. I put out a video on the TikTok app, and you could really see in the analytics what they do to suppress these videos, because those videos have some of the highest click-through rates and watch times for me, but they have below average views. And that's really not how the algorithm, or at least what we've been told the algorithm works, right? The algorithm is supposed to care about the click-through rate and the watch time. If you have good metrics on both of those, they should blast your video until it doesn't. But for those issues, it's not there. So I think, if I don't know how much coverage you've done on your show, Patrick, on around the TikTok ban, but a lot of evidence in terms of Zionist influence in the background to get that legislation passed. And that's, they've even, Mitt Romney was, that clip where he basically said, yeah, that's why we had to get rid of TikTok, is because of the Palestinian issue and how young people are seeing those images coming out of Gaza. So it's really quite blatant at this point. We'll see what happens as far as if people revolt. Imagine, I know, I don't know how much you've talked about the United Healthcare CEO, but there's a lot of anger here in America on a number of different issues. Imagine this one on top, where you have an app that has 100 million users and all of a sudden it goes away. That's going to be real shocking to people.
It's terrible.
Yeah. And they're going to be left. They're spending time on TikTok now. So that app is gone. They're going to maybe they're going to wonder, what's happening here? Is the government really out to protect us? Is it something different? That is something I don't know if they really thought through as far as the public goes. And I do see there's a lot of underlying, I know this is a little bit off topic, but there's a huge underlying movement right now in the United States to brand things as terrorism. Previously things that were, they're murder, they were, it's crime for sure, but it's not terrorism. Now everything has become terrorism, domestic terrorism. That's like the new big thing that people are talking about, because then that's when the police state can come in and shut down speech. They could do all kinds of stuff to infringe on civil liberties. And I think that's sort of the playbook that's being run underlying right now.
Yeah. They're spinning up the war on terror in the way that the Russian disinformation, malign Russian influence drove all of the censorship from 2016, and then J6 comes, and that's domestic terror, and anything that let's say hurts the confidence in our institutions and government. So like the government's doing a perfectly good job in doing that for us. We don't need none of us or no one on TikTok is going to be able to do a better job than the government or the mainstream media in terms of discrediting themselves. But the thing about TikTok is stuff can go absolutely really viral, like true viral on TikTok. I've seen stuff explode there that it can't happen on any other platforms because of the way it's designed and how things move and amplify on TikTok, which makes it very dangerous. Like you said, most of it's dance videos, people doing cool stuff for kids, jokes, pranks, but you inject some kind of heady political narratives in there with that viral potential, and it gets to all, like you said, James, to the normies that use TikTok. That's why it's dangerous, more dangerous than the others. Yeah,
absolutely. And it's speaking of the algorithm, it allows anybody to go viral, right? Because I think a lot of the different platforms like Instagram, you kind of have to already have a following to go viral, whereas TikTok, you could literally have 17 followers and you post something, and if it resonates and people watch it, it will go viral. And that's one thing that they're really afraid of. And in terms of I do want to talk about the China aspect a little bit, just in fairness. I do think China is taking the data. I have personal sort of knowledge of this because I've spoken to a ByteDance employee that works for TikTok in China, which is not even supposed to be happening, as they tell us. So I definitely think that they're taking the data, but China already has this data. Facebook sells it to them. They can get this. They already have access to America's data. So if this was really about a data privacy, I would love to see the federal government, Congress, pass a sweeping data privacy law that shields all information from being used in nefarious ways in terms of the collection. Like people, companies domestically shouldn't even be able to have this data, because once they have it, they could do whatever they want to it. And there's records of Facebook and Google selling this data to foreign governments. So that's what I would like to see happen there. And in terms of the evidence, because then on top of the data privacy, they're saying, oh, there's evidence that China has been using the app's algorithm to push nefarious narratives that are bad for the United States, good for China. But there's been no evidence of that, right? Even if the DOJ had put out that report, completely, 97% redacted report, can't read anything, but they said, this is the evidence that we have right here. We can't show it to you, but it's there. We've seen nothing like that. I've a few of my sort of cohort colleagues, we've tried to run tests, and like buddy of mine, Ian Carroll, which some people might know, he's done a video on his account, basically doing what you would call the greatest hits of anti-China content, bringing up like Tiananmen Square and the Uyghurs and all the stuff. And that video went viral on TikTok. So it's hard to say that China is really suppressing any anti-China content. I think that platform is truly sort of the egalitarian in a sense of like, hey, if that content resonates, it's going to go. Yeah. Versus there's some kind of like person pressing the thumb or on their scale and saying, oh no, this one we got to limit a little bit and that. And the last thing I'll say about this is that TikTok is trying to play by the rules. They are, they're doing the things that Google and the other companies are doing, which is like hiring ex-intelligence agents to work in their organization to try to play nice and say, hey, we're going to suppress this a little bit and this and that. I don't know if it's fully worked because I don't think they've been at it long enough for the lobbying to really take effect. I think all of this goes back to who is giving money to the congressional members proposing. I mean, the guy that proposed the bill, Mike Gallagher, is not even in Congress anymore. He took a job with Palantir, who is a defense contractor and profiting off of the war in Israel. The bill itself was also written, the TikTok bill was written by a Palantir consultant. And so you have these underlying kind of, military war machine type of folks getting involved with the crafting of the bill. It's almost like this is a mercenary. Like Mike Gallagher is there as a mercenary. Now his job is done. They're like, all right, come work for us now. Your job in Congress is finished. And so now we have a nice gig set up for you. I think he's the head of defense at Palantir, whatever that means. And so that is wild in terms of what went on in the background to get this bill through, because they've tried to pass the TikTok bill before and it didn't muster any. I mean, they tried, but it didn't really muster any kind of enough groundswell to actually get it passed with just the China issue. So this, I think, pushed it over the top. So it's I think it is, to be fair, a combination of both things that we should be worried about. But in terms of being honest about why the bill or why the app is going away, I think there's a really strong argument that the Israeli lobby was the one behind it.
And I think, if I'm not mistaken, the person who was front running the bid to buy it was Steve Mnuchin, of all people, Trump's former Treasury Secretary himself, a major Israel supporter, donor. I don't know if he's a dual citizen of Israel and the U.S., but certainly he's in there with the top guys. So that was interesting. So kind of a U.S. Israeli led effort to buy it, and who knows, do what with it, probably censor the hell out of it or mothball it and turn it into Vine, maybe, who knows. Yeah. But we got a couple minutes left. There's one more story I saw on your feed, James, and I wanted you to just tell us about, because to me, this is kind of a serious story. I mean, it's got big implications. We're talking about tech. And here it is. This is, I guess, an OpenAI whistleblower, a 26-year-old Suchir Balaji, and he died under what could be mysterious circumstances recently. OpenAI courting a bit of controversy recently. Explain to us what's going on here.
Yeah, this is a story that actually just broke yesterday. I know this apparently took place back in November, but it just broke yesterday that this whistleblower, Suchir Balaji, young whistleblower who's worked for OpenAI for 4 years, died of an apparent suicide. That's what the official investigation says, that he died of an apparent suicide. We all kind of, underline, we know what that means. The number of whistleblowers who have died under apparent suicide or have died because of a quick and short sudden illness, all these very bizarre things. But his role in OpenAI was, what he was alleging is that there is basically major copyright issues. They're stealing data, and they're not creating anything novel, which would violate a ton of copyright laws, which would have huge implications in terms of the financial viability of the company. And I think that's the big thing here, is that the bigger story on top of like what may have happened to this gentleman is that there's a transition happening right now with OpenAI. If you follow its arc from its inception of being a nonprofit entity that is developing AI technologies for the good of humanity, they say, but now has officially been reported that is now going to end, and now they're going to become a for-profit company. I know there's doing some reorganization and trying to figure out how to issue the equity and such, where now Sam Altman is going to be basically in charge of a massive, powerful organization to control how AI technology is developed, how it's deployed, what are the uses. And there's now, because it's a for-profit entity, there are now billions, tens of billions of dollars, even more than that, at stake here as far as these implications. I do know this gentleman, Balaji, was supposed to testify. There's a number of open court cases right now that he was supposed to testify in, and we don't know exactly what's going to transpire in terms of, some of the evidence he's already laid out on the internet. If you look through that thread, I capture some of that. He's proven through things that, much smarter than me, and as far as like proving out why he believes that OpenAI is violating certain laws in the United States and why that shouldn't be able to continue. And he's laying out a case for that. But yeah, I think this is a big story because it has huge implications. The tech world they have certain powers, right? When you look at OpenAI, that's going to potentially, people are saying it's the new Google, right? If people are going to get their information directly from OpenAI, and their ability to control the narrative is going to be so much more powerful. If you think about it, if you're asking a question, it's going to return to you, what they think the answer is, and there's no verification of that. So it's very, very, it could become very, very dangerous in that sense. I don't want to use the word dangerous because people use it all the time, but they could control things, the narrative more so than Google can, because then at least you'll see other results maybe pop up, or you'll go to other websites. But if you're just using OpenAI, they have huge control of that. And if you look at some of the people on the board, right? Brett Taylor is on the board, and he was a part of the whole Twitter censorship regime. If you remember that from a few years ago during the COVID years, where they started censoring, doctors and the Hunter Biden laptop stories. They're directly implicated in working with the federal government in terms of what information can be disseminated on that platform. He's on the board now. You also have Larry Summers, obviously, in terms of personal connections with Epstein. But that aside, right, he's very tied into the sort of that globalist type of crowd where, he's working with the World Bank and such in the past. And so there's a lot of interest there. There's a lot of concerning people on that board. So that's why I think this story is so important. I know it's really tragic what happened to that guy. And I know whistleblowers are always under immense pressure, and they have all kinds of ways of getting to these folks, and whether or not, maybe it was a true suicide, but there are certainly ways to influence or to make somebody feel a certain way mentally, to lead them to that outcome, right?
Absolutely.
I think there's certainly a case where you receive enough intimidation and all kinds of other things, it puts you in a really bad spot mentally.
It reminds me of, James, is Aaron Swartz, the Aaron Swartz story.
Yeah,
very similar.
Absolutely.
Aaron Swartz, major computer programmer. I think he invented RSS, the RSS feed, or he's one of the main programmers there. He was involved. It was publishing and copyright. He wanted to, and that's what he did. He put all of this academic literature that's locked behind, paywalls, expensive paywalls, university research.
Yeah.
He wanted to liberate it. And he had stories about him being harassed. There's allegation of intimidation, all these things, that he committed suicide in the end. Still a lot of questions around Aaron Swartz's death. He seemed like a great guy, brilliant, young guy. I mean, just had his whole life in front of him. I know Kim.com and others have talked about Aaron Swartz's case, and so that there's a lot of parallels, I think, on this, James.
Absolutely, yeah. So it's kind of, I guess, disturbing to see the amount of power some of these folks have in society, and I think there is a movement, I think, that we're trying to build, which is, I know we have a couple minutes left. Is sort of the decentralized movement of like, hey, when we do journalism, we want journalism to be decentralized. We don't want one top-down structure command, from an editorial perspective, saying or telling us what we can and can't say, or what we should and shouldn't report on. It's individuals going out and reporting on what they find interesting, reporting on what they think the public should know, without that kind of direction. I think it's great. I think the one piece that we're all trying to figure out is, the verification of this information. We're getting tips, we're getting sources. What's the best way to share this in a decentralized manner where we have access? We can basically remain decentralized, but have that infrastructure in place to be able to crowdsource some of the stuff. I think that's where I think we can push back on a lot of this oligarchical, authoritarian type of regime that's coming at us. I have a lot more to say. I know we're running out of time, but I think that's kind of where my hope goes, and say, hey, I think there are mechanisms that we can build to push back on these types of policies, and I'm excited and hopeful that we can get some of that done.
Oh, definitely. There's we got to increase the intelligence of the crowd, and main content creators like yourself, and you mentioned the others. You're definitely on my sort of favorite TikTok format. You yourself, Ian Carroll, does great work, and Nico House is one of my favorite political commentators on TikTok as well. So you guys are just doing a great job of fleshing out the issues and, getting the facts right, getting the narrative, the story right, and then let the people decide what they think. Tell them the story accurately and let them decide how they feel about it. I think that's a great service you're doing. James Lee, you want to follow him, ladies and gentlemen, on his various platforms. You'll see his handle down on the bottom of the screen here. And again, James, I really appreciate you. Went a little bit over time. I'm glad you had the time to spend with us. We really appreciate it. And hopefully, this conversation, what we've ended here about the information and the accuracy and how to decentralize, manage this revolution, this transition. Very important conversation. Let's hopefully keep a tab open on this, because I'd love to talk more about that in the future.
Absolutely. Happy to be back anytime, Patrick. Thank you so much for having me on. And by the way, thank you for all the complimentary stuff you said about me. I think the same back at you in terms of all the work. I mean, you have a long catalog of work that has proven that you're in it for good in terms of getting the people's information, and which is also why I think you're, from what I understand, a little bit disliked from the from the powers that be. I don't know if they're a big fan of yours, but I am.
Well, when I found out I was in the Twitter files, then I knew that it was official, and they got me banned from Twitter for a year and a half, and everything. Wow. So it was great when Matt Taibbi reached out to me to inform me about this. It was I felt honored in a way, but I was really pissed off as well, because
I'm sure, yeah,
it was State Department funded Operation Hamilton 68. I mean, just totally a clown show over there in Washington, D.C. But anyway.
And that's right. And that guy now, Brett Taylor, he's now at OpenAI, and this is where.
Ooh. Okay. Yeah.
That's troubling to hear.
These are the wrong people for these positions. So
yes.
Hopefully we can see some. Hopefully we got to raise the alarm. We got to shine light on these issues. This is the best way, hopefully, and then maybe we can get some of these people to conform to the ultimate reality, which is the truth has to out eventually on these big stories, especially. And you're doing a great job, as well as your colleagues. James Lee, thank you for joining us this week on Overdrive in the Sunday Wire.
Thanks, Patrick.
There he goes, ladies and gentlemen. That is James Lee. Great segment. We're able to cover some great stories, some really important stories as well. We'll be doing more coverage during the week. Just go to 21stcenturywire.com, and you can find our news and analysis there, as well as archives for this show, The Sunday Wire. Great interview with Mohammed Marandi today, but also last week, Ambassador Peter Ford, former British ambassador to Syria, and so on. We've got some great segments up there, and support us on our various platforms. Definitely, we're being throttled on YouTube. We need some help on especially on YouTube and Rumble as well. So find us there, like and subscribe to as much as you can. We're working our best to get some of our content more up in front, and certainly on the shorts. We've been doing great work on shorts on YouTube, and we've got a great little bit of a team behind the scenes helping us with that as well. So help us out, folks. And of course, this is our winter fundraising drive this month and next. So this is a time we need your help. This is how we raise money for the coming 12 months. This is a very important fundraiser for 21stcenturywire.com. We need your help more than ever. It's been a difficult year, but we think next year is going to be pretty powerful. We've got some great original investigative reporting, which we've released as well recently. There are more stories coming. So the best is yet to come, ladies and gentlemen. We need your support to make that happen. Now more than ever, just go to 21stcenturywire.com, or the links in the description. Donate, support. There's different options there. So we appreciate anything you're able to do to help us. And that's it. So that's all we've got time for this week, folks. It's been an epic Sunday Wire. Thank you to Mohammed Marandi from the University of Tehran, and also to James Lee, independent journalist and a fantastic media commentator. Myself, Patrick Henningsen, your host. That's all we have time for. All the best, folks. See you next time.
In the final analysis, we all inhabit this small planet, and we are all mortal.
Lately I've been watching the world gone mad. Brothers and sisters full to take a stand, to hate their fellow man, another man. Divide and conquer is the acronym plan. distract the people, control the story. Don't believe your lying eyes, you know me. Stay in power, no matter what. Playing with the doomsday clock. Turn a blind eye and gather your trust. Pushing us to turn to good. Corruption and lies. Truth is the crime, will turn to dust. Well-designed misery to keep you on edge, make you believe anything anyone says. Keep it left or right, not top to bottom. Accuse the victim, can't you see? We gotta stay in power, no matter what. Playing with the doomsday clock. Turn a blind eye and gather your trust. Pushing us to turn to dust. We've captured rights. Use our time, we'll turn to dust. To dust. Industrialized brutality, commercialized cruelty. People as commodity, cheer on war and atrocity. No accountability, perpetual impunity. Always have an enemy to hell with all humanity. Stay in power, no matter what. Playing with the doomsday clock. Turn a blind eye and gather your trust. Pushing us to turn to dust. Stay in power, cash in the stars. Playing with the doomsday clock. Turn a blind eye and join the cause. Pushing us to turn to dust. An empire of lies. History rhymes will turn to dust. Digital inmates scored on every move. Nowhere to hide, nothing to hold on to. Return to dust. As we turn to dust. As we turn to dust.
Supervised contact. They watch our every move. They examine our togetherness like we've got something to prove. I've looked behind your eyes. I've seen the sadness you hide. I've looked into your eyes. I've seen the tears that you've cried. No, I won't get used to these chains. No, I won't get used to these chains. In the legal arena, absurd theaters are staged. it's a cost. Her cruel games cause delays. From the questions you ask me, like why can't you come home tonight? From the moment you hold me, it's the shortest hour of my life. No, I won't get used to these chains. I wanna tell you what I'm feeling. I wanna tell you what I know. Someday the truth will know. I wanna tell you what I'm feeling. I wanna tell you what I know. Someday the truth will flow. Restricted freedoms. They say I've got to be careful with what I say. Their conspiracy of silence. They think the truth will lead you astray. They say that they're here for you, but they never listen to what you say. They've built walls between us. I will walk through walls to break these chains. No, I won't get used to these chains. No, I won't get used to these chains.